And I'm going to go to another obvious one. The offensive line was one that was really obvious, but I think the wide receiver group is another obvious one for us to pick up on, because like I mentioned a moment ago, the offensive line absolutely had their issues, and a big part of those issues were injuries. But the wide receiver room was just as riddled, if not even more riddled, with injuries and question marks. And some of what you got from the wide receivers last season, from the young wide receivers, I'm talking like Zion Kearney. There were several others that I think, even JJ Hester, you didn't really get their best because they were thrown in there before they were truly prepared for that situation. It's not to say that they're not good talent, so that they don't have what it takes, but there's some freshmen that just have it, and they're just ready to go out on the field and compete at the highest level in one of the best conferences. For example, Ryan Williams, he came out as a star last season. Jeremiah Smith, another wide receiver, came out as a star last season as a freshman, but there's not many that are ready for that spotlight, or ready for that, just being thrown into the wolves. Some of them, it takes them a minute to get used to it. And not only that, but you're also learning a new offensive system, new everything, really. There's so much different when you come from the high school level to the collegiate level. And then, of course, another jump from there onto the NFL. But this wide receiver room, I think I have a big question mark about them, because I'm curious about their health. Of course, I think staying healthy after last season's injuries is the biggest question mark that we have, the biggest concern that we have again. But of course, giving some health updates. I know Giovanni Gibson, he did have broken bone in his leg in April, I believe it was, this past spring, but he is on track to be ready by the opener, and the availability is kind of unclear right now, and what he's doing. I would assume that they're probably not going to have him out there at full speed until it gets really close to the beginning of season, and he might not even show up in game one, and that's okay. That's something that you don't have to be too concerned with that, but if he's not showing up in game two, that's where I'm starting to be a little concerned with him and Jaden Gibson, the both Gibsons. Again, Jaden Gibson, he missed spring quite a bit. His timeline's still uncertain, but there's a lot of optimism around both of their health, and really everybody else in that room, the wide receiver room. It seems like everyone else is ready to go, ready to work their way up, and they're running full speed. So those are the two guys that you're missing, two guys that we also expect to be ready by game time, even on week one, being ready. But when it comes to game two against Michigan, I think both those guys are guys that you would expect to see ready to be full speed, ready to be out there on the field again. But one thing that I'm concerned about, one thing that I have questions about with this Oklahoma team, this Oklahoma offense in the wide receiver room, it really isn't the talent. It's just who's going to be those difference makers, who's going to be those guys to really stand out and show themselves above the rest. I think obviously Deion Burks, he's really the only the locked in starter. I guess shout out to my guy Jay, and also John over there at Locked On. But Deion Burks, he's the only one that really feels like he's the lock in shoe in. I mean, he can be all over, and I'll talk about that in just a moment whenever I get to the depth chart. But he's really that guy that you can put him anywhere. You can put him at the X, Y, or Z, and you can feel very confident about what he's going to be able to do in those positions. You've got others, the transfers like Isaiah Sigtania from Arkansas. A lot of praise from him. He's shown a lot of consistency and shown a lot of growth, even from coming over, and shown a lot of adaptivity. And so I think that's a guy that's kind of flying under the radar a little bit. I think I'm hearing a lot about Giovanni Gibson, Jaden Gibson, if he can be healthy. You're hearing a lot about Deion Burks. There's others, but I don't hear, and Zion Kearney is another one that you hear a lot about, but I don't hear so much about Isaiah Satania. And this is a guy that I think is just poised for excellence. And as long as everything keeps on trending in the right direction for him, he's a guy that I really think is going to be big. I think you've also got Jermichael Carter, who's a guy that John Mateer talked about a lot. There's other guys. I think Keontez Lewis is also another guy that you're not hearing much about at all in the media. And that's a guy that I'm curious to hear more about him and to see him on the field, because it's a guy that came from a little non-FBS school that came to a bigger program, and we've heard about stories of these guys that come from really small programs, specifically in the wide receiver room, that end up jumping out there and making a huge leap when they get to a bigger program. And I think he's a guy that is poised for something like that. I think he's very capable of doing something like that. So yeah, I'm curious about who can be that key playmaker. I think you've also got the other young talent like Zion Kearney. You've got Ivan Carrion, who's another guy. Zion Reagans, some guys that played, mostly because of the injuries last season as true freshmen that really weren't ready. But now that they've got some of that under their belt, now are they ready? We've also heard a lot. I think earlier in the offseason, you heard a lot about Manny Choi's true freshman. You've also got Elijah Thomas, a lot of spring buzz around him, and even into the summer, a lot that came out of Elijah Thomas. And so, that's a guy I'm really excited to see. I think he comes out on the field. From what I'm hearing, I have a weird suspicion that he comes out on the field, because I also think there's going to be a lot of rotations, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But, at that wide receiver room, that's where I'm kind of seeing. And I think, ultimately, I think there's a lot of guys that just are kind of unproven in that wide receiver room. It's not really necessarily that we have guys that you don't trust, that you don't believe that will be good, that you don't believe will be difference makers. I'm just curious who can be that difference maker. And I'll bunch in with the wide receivers, the tight end group, because I think the tight end group is another question mark for Oklahoma, that you have a big concern there. Who is the lead tight end? Who is going to be that guy at tight end that's going to be the tight end, I guess. And so I'm really curious here. Of course, we've heard a lot about Jaren Kanak and how he's showing a lot of speed, but of course he's not that big guy. He's struggled some with blocking. Brent Venables mentioned that at the media days, the SEC media days. And so, you've heard about him. And so I do think he's going to see some playing time. I don't think he would have transferred over to that side of the ball without seeing some sort of playing time, or at least hopes to see the field. And I don't think we would have heard so much about him if he wouldn't. You've also got guys like Carson Kent, Will Huggins, who both transfer portal additions with some experience, but they don't really have a whole lot of production. You don't really know what they're capable of at the highest level. I do think Carson Kent is that big body, big frame guy that you can really show a lot of confidence in coming in there in your big man packages if you need a guy to block. Will Huggins is definitely another guy that you can trust there. Some younger guys that Oklahoma fans want to see in there is Caden Helms, Cade McIntyre, some, kind of, I guess, program veterans, if you will, but of course, kind of hampered by some of their injuries and things in the past. So, you've got all of this, but you've kind of got just a big pileup in that room of guys that just don't have much to prove. They don't have any stats that you can go back and look at. We know that Jaren Kanak is athletic. We know that what he's capable of in physicality, but we don't know what he's capable of in the tight end room. Carson Kent, Will Huggins, and even Caden Helms and Caden McIntyre, we know that they're good. We know that they're capable of something, but what are they actually going to give us on the field? Because we don't really know what's going on in that room. One thing I will say to put some Oklahoma fans at ease in the tight end room this season is that Ben Arbuckle doesn't seem to use the tight end as often as some schemes do. And I think, you look at what Lincoln Riley ran with Baker Mayfield to Mark Ingram, or even what Oklahoma ran with Braden Willis. I feel like that was another big guy that Oklahoma tried to utilize a lot. You're not going to see that much of a utilization from the tight end group. And so I think with that, you don't have to worry as much about that room as long as they can stay healthy and block, and then they can maybe come in there and those big man formations help block, help in the running game. I think that's the main concern in the tight end room for Oklahoma fans going into this season.